Welcome, Ken Futernick, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Michael. Nice to be here.
Glad to have you on today. We're going to be talking about your work as a speaker and educator. And if you know anything about me, I know my audience knows quite a bit about me because I talk about it a lot on the podcast, is I was a former educator myself. And education has changed over the years. I mean, we can look at the institution of normalized schooling. It was, I believe, 1849, 1847. Around there, Massachusetts was bringing the normalized schools where people were coming in and they wanted to educate people because it created better workers. And that was true. Because if you were a coal miner, you wanted to be able to read what an explosive was or what was dangerous. It helped with efficiency. But as the institution went on, education started to change with a lot more testing. In our real world today, it doesn't necessarily apply because if you take an 18-year-old, for example, when they're done with high school, they don't know how to balance their checkbooks. They don't know what the real world is going to bring them. It's almost like they're down the stream without a paddle. And we need to look at education for what it truly is, an opportunity to grow and to learn. But not many people take that opportunity. And we're going to be talking about all that today in your own words. Tell the world who you are, what you do, and how you help.
Well, my name is Ken Futernick. I spent most of my career being a teacher educator. I headed up a national school turnaround center for a nonprofit organization called WestEd. And we were working, when I was heading that up, with some of the schools in the country that were struggling the most, trying to figure out how to turn them around. And it often actually began with work with the people working in those schools who had gotten so discouraged at times they weren't even speaking with each other. And we needed to kind of address that. And now I have a couple of podcasts. One I started about 5 years ago called Teacher Stories, and I did that because I think what we've lost in our society is a collective memory about the incredible impact that teachers have in our lives. Unfortunately, the narrative too often is about the failing education system and what we wish that they were doing that they're not. And unfortunately, too many teachers aren't recognized. We don't remember them and acknowledge and thank them. Consequently, many of them leave before they retire. And so Teacher Stories is a way to share stories, often from people who have had a teacher that had a huge and a profound impact on their life. And I also have another podcast called Courageous Conversations about our schools. That is really about trying to acknowledge that there are these new phenomena we refer to, maybe it's not so new, these culture wars where people come to board meetings and yell at their elected leaders. And there are these sort of polarized debates that are occurring that are really wreaking havoc on schools. Michael, I just want to respond to something you said. You talked about, when schools first started emerging in this country, it wasn't that many years later in the 19th century when schooling became compulsory. And the reason that happened in virtually every state is because they didn't want people to take advantage of youth and use them out in the fields and where they wouldn't get an opportunity to learn subjects and material that we think everyone needs to learn in order to be a productive member of society. But what's interesting now, and we had an interesting, courageous conversation about this recently, is the fastest growing form of education today, and that's homeschooling. And it's a fascinating subject, and it is a little bit polarizing because many states allow parents to homeschool their kids. They don't have to show any qualifications themselves. They don't have to prove that they've done anything. And if they want to keep their kids home from school and essentially do nothing with them, in many states, it's completely permissible, which in my mind sort of violates this idea that all states have adopted this idea that everyone needs to go to school. Everyone, it's compulsory. Everyone, benefit of our families and our communities and our society, schooling is compulsory. Could we do a better job of it? In many places, of course. But the idea that people can keep their kids home, and if they choose not to educate them at all, nowadays, many people say, well, that's their prerogative. But in my mind, we're shortchanging those kids. And I have examples from my podcast of people that have been on that say, I never learned math because my parents said that girls don't need to learn math, they'll never use it. And later, she wanted to become involved in science, and she had to learn math on her own after she was done with school. That didn't work out very well for her. And she later reconciled with her parents, who said, I think we shortchanged you, and it was a mistake to do that. But that's the kind of topic, Michael, that I like to have courageous, respectful conversations with people about. Because too often we don't have those conversations, or when we do, we end up yelling at each other or doing it in ways that aren't very productive.
Yeah, and we could definitely have that conversation here because it is a conversation that many people need to understand because you are right. A lot of people are taking their kids out of the schools and homeschooling them. Now, they don't have the credentials, they don't have the background to do it. We saw during the pandemic, the levels of reading, math, writing, all of that went down because you're giving a parent the role of a teacher. And the good majority of parents learned that teachers are not just glorified babysitters anymore. However, now there was an opportunity for parents to look at if their kid is learning in school. Because what happened with the schools is that they put their kids in front of a computer, a laptop, and they said, okay, you're going to sit for this Zoom meeting. And it was the Zoom meetings for all the kids. And you could see the frustration from videos. You could watch TikTok videos, YouTube videos of these kids trying to learn, and they're not able to do it because technology is great and all, but when it comes to a child and their development and learning, having that in-person interaction is so much more powerful. And I always say there's things that parents can do and there's things that other people can do. For example, I'm a coach. I have coached many things in my life. I was a teacher also, music, special ed. So I have done a lot of different things. And one of the things that parents would come to me and they would tell me, like for swimming, for example, they'll say, Michael, you don't think I know how to swim? You don't think I can teach my kids how to swim? And I say, no, I believe you know how to swim. I believe you can teach them. But then they will go on to say, there's certain things that a parent does, and there's certain things that a coach or a teacher does, and it creates a different dynamic. So I wanted to get into that conversation of the dynamic of taking away the teachers and just having the homeschool aspect of a parent be the person, because a parent has the potential to care more than a teacher because a teacher has a classroom of 25, 30 kids. And maybe that teacher's already checked out. Maybe they're 2 or 3 years from retirement and they don't have that mindset. But there are so many good teachers that want to do good every single day they walk into the school. They want to make sure every single child is there, is learning, is prosperous. But then there's going to be those few bad apples, of course. So we don't have to talk about those few bad apples. Let's talk about the teachers that care. Let's talk about the opportunity that maybe the children are going to miss if they do homeschooling only.
My Teacher Stories podcast is, I think there's over 80 episodes, and you can listen to any one of those and hear someone talking about a teacher that changed their life. There was actually, I'm trying to think which one of so many that I could focus on. But one of the things that's really important that you alluded to is, yes, there are parents that are doing wonderful jobs of homeschooling. And one of the things they do is they create networks with other homeschooling parents, and they coordinate field trips. They spend time in each other's homes. There may be a parent that has some background in science and has science activities planned for them. Another might be doing art activities. What happens there is that those kids get an opportunity to interact with other kids. One of the really important things about school is the breadth of experience that people get, meeting people who have different backgrounds, different cultures, different perspectives. And if you're homeschooled and you don't have an opportunity, your parents that are homeschooling you don't connect you with other kids that are different than you, then there's a tendency to become pretty narrow in your thinking and to not understand the points of view, to empathize with people who are different from you. So I'm not at all opposed to homeschooling. What concerns me, though, is that in the name of parent rights, there are some people that keep their kids at home. And in one case, I gave an example of a student that didn't learn math because her parents didn't think she knew it. There was another former student who was on the podcast who said that he only learned about creationism and never learned anything about evolution. As a society, are there certain things that we think all kids should know and be able to do? And I think the answer is yes. There's a prescribed curriculum in every state. Kids should learn how to read and write, do mathematics, learn about social studies, learn about, honestly, about our history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if our society isn't doing that, and kids aren't adequately prepared and knowledgeable, it doesn't bode well for the future of our country to have an uneducated population. Now, what it does do is it raises this question about what are the rights of parents? Should a parent be able to do virtually anything they want with their kids? Some would say, yeah, those children belong to those parents. But others would say, well, they're not their property. And don't children have some rights to get a broad, full education? And of course, I would say they do. I think all of us would agree that no parent has the right to abuse their child. And we have laws in states that protect kids against that. But is there something that we might agree to is educational neglect, where the kids simply aren't getting education? They're working out in the fields or doing something, or on their tablets playing games because the parent just doesn't want them in school and has decided not to ensure that they're getting an education.
Yeah. It seems like some children are going to be shorthanded in some regards. Like they're just not going to be given the opportunities that others would get if they went to the public schools, because, of course, they're going to follow the curriculum. They're going to learn their basics, the reading, writing, the math. The history is the big part, too. However, if we look at what's happening in the school system today with the curriculum and how it's changing and it's so dynamic, and how we're bringing politics to schools, that starts to change what parents are thinking now, because it's no longer about, I'm going to educate my child to be able to go out into the world to be critical thinkers and to know how to do reading, writing, and math and be a successful member of society. Now it's almost like an indoctrination of these children. And what parents are thinking about, I believe, is they're trying to keep that away from their children because they have their own views of what they believe, whether it be religion, values, and the parent has every single right to teach them those things. Most children, I believe I forget the percent. I want to say it's like 60 to 70% of children are going to follow the values and the beliefs of their parents. That right there is just going to show how much influence they're going to get outside, 40%, right? So that is like that choice there. So they get to make a selection. And I mean, if we look at different cultures and different communities, let's use Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a known area where there's a lot of struggle and there's a lot of issues with education, but yet there's many hopeful parents still. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Waiting for Superman. It's a great movie. And it's about the lottery system to get the children into a magnet school. And parents were just so hopeful to get their kids out of the public schools, because what tends to happen is if we have a classroom of 25 to 30 kids, maybe the majority of them have single parent households. Maybe they're orphaned or they don't have any type of guardian figure besides maybe a grandmother, grandfather. So they don't necessarily have the family support. They do is they lean on their peers, and yet their peers might be influenced by a bad idea. Maybe it could be gangs, violence, that type of mentality. So we look at inner cities, Chicago, Brooklyn, these areas suffer from children not so much worrying about the education. Most people that go to the schools that have this type of mindset only go because it's like a opportunity for them to get a reprieve from their current life. Maybe they don't have food at the house. And I know there's many people, even in my district, and we were a pretty wealthy district, kids didn't have food at their house. They would rely to come into school to get lunches in the programs to eat, and parents relied on that. There is definitely a difference in why someone will go to school. Some people go for the opportunity, some people go because they were told to. Then you have the parents who don't want their kids to go to school because of what's happening. It's not happening in every school, but it's happening enough that a lot of parents are starting to pay attention.
I want to pick up on one thing that you said, Michael, about this notion of indoctrination. And I just wonder if you yourself have come to believe that there's a lot of indoctrination going in schools, which, of course, I think we'd all agree indoctrination we generally think of as a negative thing, something we wouldn't want to happen and shouldn't go on anywhere. But I just wonder if you believe that that is common in schools and if you're concerned about it. And what's the basis for your belief that that's true, if in fact you believe it's true?
Well, what I can do is I can speak from experience because, like I said, I was in the schools for about 5 years and before I left. And I can say that there are going to be teachers who just follow the curriculum, just add a little bit of their own spice to it, and teachers that just kind of go off the cuff and do their own thing. Now, what I will say, indoctrination is not necessarily a bad thing. It's an opportunity for a child to look at different views and to accept different views if they want to. If you came into my classroom, and let's say I was talking about different beliefs and values than your parents have. You have a choice as a child to choose my beliefs or to choose your parents' beliefs. And that indoctrination, if you look at it from the parents' perspective, is I'm letting my kid go to school and be changed by another person. So indoctrination meaning that, not so much indoctrination of I'm leading you down the wrong path. It's just that everyone has a different model and how they teach. We get to make a choice. However, we can agree that a 7-year-old making a choice to change their body or to, run away from home is probably not a good thing. That's why we have parents taking over. That we have dependents until they're 18, sometimes 25. I think it's for Obama, it's like 25 to get the credits and stuff like that. We just have to look at the indoctrination for our kids in the modern world, not so much of our traditional values. It comes down to what values do you want? Because parents can say, I want traditional values for my child. And we can say, well, we want modern values for our child. It's the parent's choice. That's where we are with indoctrination. Indoctrination is more of going against the parent's choice.
I think the notion, this concept of indoctrination to me means something like telling a child that you have to believe this way and you don't really have a choice. And why do I need to believe that? Because I say so. And in the early grades, you alluded to that, I think there is some sort of acceptable indoctrination, like you're not allowed to bully other people. You have to be kind. You don't take other people's things. And there isn't really a choice. And we have these expectations for how people are going to behave. And we sort of try to instill that values that hopefully parents and everyone in school would agree on, just basic civility and basic ways that we would expect people to treat each other. But then as kids get older, we start studying history, you learn about different cultures and different norms. I think the job of teachers is certainly not to indoctrinate and to say, this is right and you must believe this and this is wrong. The idea is opening up, and you alluded to this, is saying, my job here as a teacher is to have you learn what the opportunities are, what the different beliefs and values are, so that you can choose yourself. And I'll provide you with some critical thinking tools so that you can do that. But I'm not going to tell you, you must believe this or that. I was talking with a teacher recently about this indoctrination idea, and he said, what he finds that his job is that many kids come in having been indoctrinated by parents and relatives and outside of school. And his job is to provide critical thinking skills so they can deal with having been indoctrinated. He says, but I don't indoctrinate, and I don't see that many of my colleagues in schools are there telling kids what it is they must believe, and sort of not giving kids an opportunity to use critical thinking skills so that they believe whatever the teacher thinks that they should believe.
I agree with that aspect. The only issue is recently, I would say it happened around 2006, around that time, where teachers started to become a lot more political in the classroom. They would say, this is who I'm voting for, this is why I'm voting for them. And it's perfectly fine to have an opinion as a teacher. I'm not saying you can't have that opinion. What I am saying is when you're trying to say, or when you belittle another candidate. So for me, like, I don't necessarily want to belittle a candidate because there's always going to be values in a person. And if I prefer a different candidate, this is why I prefer this candidate versus this candidate versus what typically tends to happen is a one-sided conversation. So think of it in the realm of I only tell you all of the bad things and not the good things. Let's use race as an example, is maybe the best example we can talk about. And let's say I say a certain race or a certain culture is this, and I continually tell a child, a person, that this person is this, and they don't have any experience other than what they have been told. Now they're finally going to see this person and they're going to automatically have this prejudice against them because of the stigma that they have grown to be accustomed to. Now, again, they have that choice to learn. And I have seen it happen many times where a child has been told to believe a certain thing. And then tends to happen is they get to know the person and they're like, wait, you're not like what my parents said or my teacher said. You're totally different. You're cool. You're like, I want to be friends with you. I want to hang out with you. And this is the reality. We have our own opinions. I'm sure, I don't know if you have ever experienced this, but I have. Your parents will say, oh, I don't like this kid or something like that in school. Why? Right? Like, that's the adversity we have to go through in order to grow because we have to deal with people that might not be good people in the world. Not everyone's going to have our best intentions. We have to be able to discern that. And if we can't discern it, then that's when we start to go down the wrong path with the wrong people and we don't make our own choices. Critical thinking is now out the window. We have to open up that window. And as you said, there are teachers who bring in the critical thinking aspect. But then if we look at the school system, what they're doing is they're doing multiple choice scantrons. Not there's no longer scantrons. Everything is done on a Chromebook now, where you pick A, B, C, or D. And you know what these kids are doing? They're already checked out. They just pick any old thing. They don't care what if they get it right. They just want to get it done. Education is going more so of regurgitate this information, take this test, it's going to be life changing for you versus taking the real teaching out of what a teacher should be doing, bringing back in teacher to the classroom versus technology. Read this, watch this video. This is going to teach you everything you need to know. There's a big change and a big shift that happened.
You know, I want to go back to something you said when I asked you the question about indoctrination. You said I can speak from my own experience. There was a person I interviewed for Teacher Stories, and if you go to teacherstories.org, you'll find it. If you look for a woman named Diana Hess, she's the dean of the College of Education at the University of Wisconsin, I believe, who a number of years ago wrote a book called Politics in the Classroom. And she and her colleagues actually went out into lots and lots of high school social studies classrooms and observed what was actually going on. And they interviewed kids to see if, in fact, conversation about politics was an attempt by teachers to get them to think like they thought, and or whether students felt that they knew what their teachers believed, what candidates they supported and which ones they didn't. What was really, and so I raised this because this was actually a scientific study. It's not just based on a story that you might tell or a teacher I might remember, but it's actually a scientific study with hundreds of teachers. And what they found was that students often said they didn't know what political leaning their teachers had. The teachers wouldn't really reveal that. But in cases where they did, the students were asked, did they try to influence you to believe like them? And most students, vast majority, said no. They didn't try to influence me to think like, and were you influenced by them anyway? And they said, no, this charge of indoctrination that there are vast numbers of teachers out there trying to get people to think like them or to speak disparagingly about this group or that group. I don't think that the research bears that out. Now, can we find an example of it? We can find examples of bad doctors, bad attorneys, bad anything. What I think we have to avoid doing, though, is generalizing and saying because we can think of a bad school or a bad teacher or a bad doctor, that there must be many, many more like that. But in fact, I think more often than not, what teachers are trying to do is to open minds, get people to think, to change their prejudices and their biases and their stereotypes, to be more open-minded, not less open-minded.
Mm-hmm. And I definitely agree with that. There's going to be teachers who do the right thing. They're just going in wanting to make sure they give the children the best education. And it goes back to what you said earlier about the examples of homeschooling, where a parent said, you shouldn't need math or you don't have to learn math, right? Women don't need to learn math or whatever it was. That right there is going to be one aspect. And we can look at any aspect that you said. We could look at bad lawyers, bad teachers, bad doctors. They're always going to be there. But we do have to look at how old our education system and is it changing with times because technology is taking over, as I'm sure you're familiar with. Many children that they're 11, 12 years old, maybe even as young as 8 years old that I've seen, has a smartphone. And they spend all of this time on the smartphone. They're not necessarily going out. I have a playground near my house. And the amount of children I see is it's minimal, compared to if I was younger. That playground would have been popping. It would have been crowded. And this is where we're going, right? People are getting away from the outside type of lifestyle, the social type of lifestyle. Everything can be done online, video games online, Zoom calls online. And technology can bring us together, but then it can also separate us. So, what tends to happen now is when they are looking for a view, because now they have all this instilled beliefs from their parents, their teachers, etc. They look for communities online, go on Facebook groups, go on Twitter, and now they start to find these people who have these like mindsets. And what tends to happen is they just stay stuck in this. And now we have our political pendulum has swung so far left and so far right. There's no more in between. And this is where many people are struggling because either I'm on this side or I'm on this side. And if you're not on my side, you're wrong. And that's the mentality many people are struggling with today.
Absolutely right. There's two things I want to underscore that you said that and expand on a little bit about technology. One is that there is this tendency for people to become siloed, and you spend time on social media sites and with people who think like you do. And what it does is it reinforces your own views, and you then never get an opportunity to hear about someone who has a different perspective. There's something called confirmation bias. Motivated reasoning is it's gratifying for us to see things and on news that confirm what we already believe. And I think it's an unfortunate aspect of the rise of technology and social media. And I think schools can be sort of an antidote to that, to say we're going to look at the broad range of views so that you can then make a wiser choice. The other thing Michael, was yesterday I had two people on my podcast, Courageous Conversations, about our schools who wrote a book called Morning Classroom Conversations. It's a book that helps teachers with kids from fifth grade up through high school have a 15 to 20-minute conversation with their students every morning. In high school, that might be in a social studies class or in a homeroom class, or it could even be in a math class. And the whole idea of it is to sort of become a counter to the way kids are communicating with each other that you alluded to through texting and emails. And what they say is that social media these days has come to sort of define how adolescents see themselves. And it actually creates a huge amount of anxiety to some kids to become depressed, to drop out of school, to have serious mental health issues. Well, this idea of a morning classroom conversation that the teacher initiates and the kids do with each other is a way to have real, genuine, personal conversation around topics that kids care about, where they're having face-to-face conversations, they're listening, they're not bullying each other, they're getting different perspectives and not doing it the way that we often see in social media, where people anonymously can say terrible things about someone else and shame people. And then kids get addicted to it and they think this is how I communicate. And yet it's so destructive. And this other way of we're going to have personal conversations with some empathy and listening and be respectful to each other, I think it's an excellent way in schools to kind of provide a different way in getting kids back to the way that we all should be communicating with ourselves.
Yeah. And it is an ongoing issue. It is an ongoing development. Education is going to always be one of those things that evolve with us. Same thing with mindset. How we think when we're young is not the same as when we think when we're older. You can think about when we're teens, when we're 20s, in our 30s, our mid 30s, when we might want to start a family. We think very differently. And we do have to be open to be humble in a sense that everyone's going to have their own opinions. Everyone's going to have their own adjustments they would like to make in their life and what they would like to see. And we have come a good length, but we still have a long way to go in helping people understand that education is going to be something that is going to help you develop as a person. It's not something that ends when you graduate and you get your diploma. It's something that we continually learn every single day. And our conversation was just that. It's a discussion to figure out what's truly going on in their mind, to have a dialogue that is not attackive or attacking or going to be obtrusive or a way that belittles the other person. It's one where we can have different viewpoints and still accept each other. And we have come, around the block, it seems, where we're talking about education, what it means, homeschooling, public schooling, the indoctrination, public schools, whatever. We can have our own views and our own ideals, but we do have to look at what is the end result. And the end result, typically for parents, teachers, societies, that we want the best individual to be there. We want the best person to come out and to prosper in life, not suffer, not struggle, not hate somebody with all these hate crimes going on. We want someone who's going to be forefront in society and lead by example. As I said, all that, I know it's a lot, but before we go, can you tell people where they can find you, the names of your podcasts again, and I'll make sure to throw those in the description box below.
And if I could, I just want to add to something you said at the end, then I'll say that. But I just have to say that I've come to believe that the single greatest threat to our personal well-being, our families, our communities, and even our country is the level of polarization that has come about, is what you're alluding to, our tendency in our society in recent years to, you described it as, and I saw on your website as we sort of went into a nosedive back in 2018, and I see it as toxic polarization. It's us versus them, sort of feelings of contempt about people that don't look and think like us. And the reason I think it's the single greatest threat, even more so than gun violence, world peace, immigration, any of the things that we read about in the news all the time, the reason it's a greater threat than those things is if we can't figure out how to communicate with each other and listen and to be respectful, even when we disagree, we will never solve any of those other problems. So I just would share that. And so my podcast, one of the two, is called Courageous Conversations About Our Schools. And you can find it on any podcasting platform. And also the website is schoolconversations.org. And it's really about getting people who disagree or think they disagree to come together and have civil dialogue with each other. And what's an amazing thing, Michael, is that even when I get political opposites together online with me and we talk about things like homeschooling or school choice, charter schools, vouchers, how kids learn about race or gender identity, in the end, most of the time, people end up coming away saying, there's much more common ground here than I thought. And it's because people listen to each other and set aside their preconceived stereotypes about what the other person thought. So the other podcast that I started in about 2018 is called Teacher Stories, and you can find it at teacherstories.org. And you can also search for it on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcast. So it's two podcasts, Courageous Conversations About Our Schools and Teacher Stories.
Perfect. And I'll make it easy for everyone. Both podcasts will be in the description box below so people can tune in, listen, learn more about education, what's going on in the world, and then begin to align to what their values truly are. Because at the end of the day, our character doesn't change much from when we're young. We learn who we want to become. And if you become a person that you're not happy with later on in life, you can change, you can make the changes. Some people, they use religion for that. Some people, they use mentors, coaches for that. Some people, they remember a wonderful teacher in their life and they say, I would like to be like that when I'm older too. There's so much to education, and the conversation that we have today was a great conversation. I want to thank you so much for coming on, talking about your work and being that beacon, to let people know that education doesn't have to be so much of what I only say. It can be about the collective and what critical thinking truly is. And we get to decide what you want to do, right? It's a flow chart, it's a system. And how you get to choose to live life is good to be something that you should feel is proper for you, not so much of what someone else has told you. So I want to thank you so much for coming on, being that wonderful light.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael. Thanks for the great work you're doing and being a coach and helping people understand why being a coach, just like being a great teacher, is not only important, but it can have a profound and lasting impact on the people that you interact with. And I'm sure you have stories you could probably share about the impact that people have had on you that have done that and the impact you've had on others that you've coached.
Exactly. Very true. With that being said, Ken Futernick, everyone.
Thank you so much.